We continue the 5 invitations. And last week we talked about don't wait. And today we talk about welcome everything and push away nothing. Sounds pretty big, doesn't it? Yes. So we say in Unity that we are a positive path for spiritual living. Yet what about the times when life presents us with heaviness, sadness, grief, or hurts? Doesn't life do that sometimes? I can say mine has. How about yours? We feel those things in this human experience. So to recite a list of platitudes or to tell ourselves, don't worry, be happy, or to just jump right into things like, it's all good, it's all God. It feels so inadequate for the pain or the suffering that shows up from time to time in life. And I don't know about you, but when a big challenge or a big experience of grief or sadness arrives, I sometimes want to turn and run. I know in 2021, I experienced a lot of loss, and there was nothing that I would rather have done than turn around and just run away from all of that. And yet I couldn't. I had to sit in it and work through it. My first inclination may not always be to welcome the experience. It may not be to welcome everything. I want to push stuff away. I don't think I'm abnormal in that either. But Frank Ostaseski, author of The 5 Invitations, tells this story. He was at a workshop presenting in the rural northwest part of the country, and he was speaking about the possibilities that arise when we stop running away from what is difficult and we stand there next to it. One of the gentlemen who was attending was a big, burly man, middle-aged, and big, broad shoulders, and a smile equally as broad, as Frank describes. And he shouted out from the audience, "That reminds me of my telephone poles." Yes. Frank didn't have any idea what he was talking about. So he said, "Telephone poles? What do you mean?" And the man explained that he had a job installing telephone poles. We see them on the streets. And he said, the poles are heavy and hard, and they can be as long as 40 feet tall. And there was a critical moment when you plunked the pole into the ground that it's very wobbly and unsteady. And it could easily fall over. And if it does, it could injure you severely. So his first day on the job, he turned to his partner. He said, "If this pole starts to fall, I'm going to run." But the old-timer replied from his experience, "Nope, you don't want to do that. If that pole starts to fall, get right up next to it. You want to get really close in there and you want to put your hands on the pole. That's the only safe place to be. The only safe place to be is right next to that looming 40-foot telephone pole with our hands on it. I don't know about you, but I'm 5'3" and that feels pretty intimidating. But that's the perfect analogy. When life throws us something hard or difficult or something that we want to run away from, stand up there, right next to it, and put your hands on it. Oh my, can you feel power in that? Yeah, And when we're confronted what feels like inconveniences, disturbances, or challenges in life, we want to run away or resist, push back. Yeah. If we don't want to move away from it, we might want to push back. And then life has the opportunity to take us by greater surprise when we do that. Just like that telephone pole. If we run from it, boy, it can come landing and crashing down on us hard and heavy, just as life would land on us in a harsher way if we run away from it. We're often taught that suffering means that there's something wrong, that we've done something wrong, perhaps, or a mistake has been made. We have this notion in our Western world that we're not supposed to suffer. Has anyone lived this long in life and never had a moment of suffering, physical or spiritual? I doubt it. And yet we're taught that. And we're taught that suffering is to be avoided. We're supposed to stay away from the suffering. So what do? We distract ourselves. We turn to work. We turn to shopping, to eating, to drinking, to gaming, to scrolling. You recognize that, do you? We turn to all of those activities to distract us and keep us busy from the situation at hand. Anything that will take our attention away from whatever is presenting in our life that we might not like. Now, these distractions can bring temporary relief. I know I've scrolled YouTube for hours and learned some things about fixing my shower, and then you're in that rabbit hole. Yes. So there's distraction, and there's some comfort in that for a while, but none of those things give us a permanent solution. When I was living through divorce, it was a sad time for me. It was a very hard time for me. I felt like a failure, like a total and complete failure. You see, I was the very first person in my mother's family or my father's family to ever be divorced. I felt like I was wearing that scarlet D everywhere I went. I was a failure on my best day. Failed. I had failed my family, my immediate family, and my extended family. And so to avoid the pain of that and to avoid the loneliness of my big house, empty of all my children when they went to their fathers, I took long weekends and went away. I drove to the Keys. I lived in Florida at that time. I drove to Jupiter Beach. I drove to Naples. I drove to Tampa. And then that got a little bit expensive. So I started to kayak. I kayaked every river, every lake. I kayaked in the ocean. I spent hours and hours out kayaking. And then I started training for marathons. I literally tried to run away from what was happening, from those feelings of sadness. Anything to avoid being in the deafening silence of my home without my children in it. I would do anything. Then I poured myself into my work. I worked every weekend that the children went to their fathers. I made quite successful things happen for the company, but I was worn out. And it was through that fatigue I started to stay home. But I couldn't sit in my home, so I started to paint. Anything that didn't move, I painted. I painted all of the bedrooms, I painted the living room, the dining room, the family room, I painted every wall. I painted every hallway, I painted every door and trim that there was in the house. Every inch of space had a new coat of paint. But I was home, and I was there, and I couldn't sit, but I could stand on the ladder and with the paintbrush be still, with the roller be still, feel those fearful feelings of sadness and grief and failure and being alone. And things started to move and shift and change. I had a lovely new home, freshly painted home. And I learned that I could be in my home. And I could learn to be grateful for that home. And just so joyful when the kids finally did return on Sunday evening. It was a long process. Running away, avoiding. And yet when I stepped into it and had to be there, everything was okay. It was scary at first, but it worked out okay. I learned that I could feel safe by myself in my home. And I learned that I could be grateful for the weekends that my children spent with their father, and grateful for the relationship that they built. Frank, in his writings, say suffering is exacerbated by avoidance. Not just look at the bruises, not just look at the painful moments that life places for us, but to step in to those moments, welcome everything, and push away nothing. It's an invitation that feels like a big invitation to welcome everything, those horrible feelings, to push away nothing, not to push away the fear. Yes. So this invitation of welcome everything and push away nothing feels like a safe solution for healing our hearts of the hurts, of experiencing life in this human realm. Not a one of us escapes life without some experience of suffering. Yes, we are first and foremost, before we are anything, we are spiritual beings. And we live in this realm of the human. And we live in this realm and we claim that God is present in everything. And that God is the goodness that is in everything. And this human existence, sometimes relationships end. Sometimes jobs go away, or the bank account looks empty, or a loved one passes, and so on, and so on. Everyone here and at home has had their own experiences. So how can we live authentically? How can we keep life real and be vulnerable if we're pretending that everything is okay? If we're living a facade of happy-go-lucky and everything is just fine, we don't have a care in the world. How real is life then? We call this spiritual bypassing, when we're living an experience and yet we push ourselves to jump into, oh, everything's good. We feel like we skip a step or two or three. We bypass the process of living in our human feelings, of recognizing that we have a feeling. And sometimes we put on a strong face of happiness out here for the world. But for what purpose? When we allow ourselves to live authentically and real, we will find a community of people to support us, to honor us, to pray for us, to hold space for us as we go through our life challenges. And sometimes we feel like a failure if our spiritual life gets shaky, if our faith falters, if we begin to doubt and question in life challenges. But for me, I need a faith. I need a spiritual practice that I can poke at, that I can question, that I can say, really? What's this about? That I can really live sometimes in doubt and then turn back in faith. That I can learn the depth of faith. And it's very easy. These challenges allow us to build that faith. Because when we walk through life experience, we can see how we navigated it. How many of us can look at our life until this time and say, well, I didn't exactly like that experience. I would rather have not been divorced. But boy, I learned a lot about being strong in my faith, about being tenacious in my spiritual practice, by being allowing of life to unfold. And here we are today. Life unfolds beautifully and perfectly when we allow it to. We claim that God is good and present in everything. God is present in the sadness as well as the joy. God is present in the challenges as well as the triumphs. God is present in all of it. So stepping into this invitation of welcome everything and pushing away nothing allows us time and space for deep spiritual healing. Really deep spiritual healing of all of our wounds, of all of our hurts. And then I recognize the beauty of the words of Ecclesiastes. This will sound familiar to you, either from scripture or from a good old folk tune. For everything there's a season, and a time for every matter under heaven. There is a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what has been planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to cast away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time for silence and a time to speak. There is a time for everything. So we don't have to be fearful. We can really live the invitation of welcome everything and push away nothing. When we do this, it allows us time and space for that deep, rich spiritual connection. It allows us time to find that presence of God, the presence of love, even in the deep hurts of life. Standing on that ladder, painting all my rooms, that's exactly what I found. I found that presence of God that I was running away from was right there. Even as Unity co-founder Myrtle Fillmore put down generational teachings to claim her health. You see, Myrtle had been taught that she inherited illness. Chronic respiratory disease was plaguing her. She tried everything until she heard that she was a child of God and did not inherit illness. Myrtle didn't run away. Myrtle stopped. Myrtle sat. She sat daily for more than a year, blessing and giving thanks for every part of her physical body, inviting healing to come in. So she believed in that power of prayer. And she sat in the spaciousness of gratitude for what was working and for everything that was already healing. For me, I wasn't quite ready to sit, but at least I stopped running. And I stood on a ladder of all places to find that presence, to face the pain, to face the hurt, and to face the suffering. Learn to welcome it all. And as we welcome it, we soften it. We make it less frightening. We make it something that we can navigate. And I want to say a word about trauma and abusive experiences. If you or someone you know experiences abuse of any kind, physical, sexual, emotional, spiritual, leave. Leave quickly. We don't stay in those places. We leave those places so that healing can begin. Frank says to welcome everything and push away nothing is an invitation to openness, to awaken a curious mind. Do you ever wonder, why is this happening? How is this happening? A curious mind. Being in openness doesn't determine what reality is. Being an open mind allows us to discover what reality is. And we don't get attached in the experience or the viewpoints. We reject viewpoints from others, from the world. We sit in the openness of allowing that experience to be revealed to us. Openness is the nature of awareness. When you're open, body, mind, and spirit, and you're walking on a trail in the woods, you notice everything, right? And the same is for our life experience. Openness is spaciousness. It's allowing and giving up the shoulds and the musts of life. It's inviting a presence and experience to unfold. We've all lived in those times in our life when everything is just unfolding beautifully. The job comes, the relationship comes, everything happens easily, almost effortlessly. All we have to think about it and seemingly it happens. That's living in the flow. Openness welcomes paradox and contradictions. Openness allows us to feel joy, even in times of sadness. We can feel and experience both. It permits whatever is emerging to emerge fully, so we can get through it all. We don't stifle anything. It keeps our hearts and our minds available to new experiences, new knowledge, new wisdom, and great opportunities for growth. So openness means that we're receiving the unknown, which can sometimes feel a little bit scary, but being open allows us to receive the mystery of the unknown and welcoming the unpleasant and the good times as equally valid experiences and equally important experiences. Think of who you have become because of the challenge in your life. Think of the strength you have built, the resilience that you have fostered. Think of the faith that you have deepened when you've gone through a challenging time. Now, if we're only here for the happy times and the celebratory stuff in life, we'll be living what Eric Butterworth calls circumference living, on the outside of life. We're viewing things, but we're not really feeling them, we're seeing them, but not really living them. So I don't know about you, but I don't want to be a circumference liver. I want to dive in, and I want to live all of life, all of it, every bit of it. So what are you willing to be available for? What are you willing and available for? The fun and happy times and the sad times? Now, you probably know that 2024 is an election year. And as I watched the news and I went back onto Facebook so that I could make some posts for the church for the season of nonviolence. And if you don't know about that, the season of nonviolence begins on January 30th and ends on April 4th. And it marks the days of the death of Mahatma Gandhi and Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. So during those 60 days, there are 60 practices that we can engage in to build a life of peacefulness for ourselves, for our families, our communities, And what we do for ourselves impacts the whole world. So participate in that as you like. So I backtrack. Got sidetracked on the season of nonviolence. So as I was scrolling through Facebook, I couldn't help but notice the sarcasm, the anger, the extreme anger in some cases, and the words printed one towards another on this virtual platform where we don't have to see the person that we're speaking to. And I felt sad about that, how people talk to each other on social media. So I knew that it was a time calling me to live these unity principles more deeply, more aware, and not to push away anything, not to push away whatever happens in this coming year around election, around families, around weather, not to push away any of it, but to welcome it. Welcome new thoughts, new ideas, new perspectives of people who think, speak, vote, live, and love differently than us. Listen to them. You don't have to abide by them. Listen to them. Find some morsel of truth, some grain of truth in what the other person says. And perhaps pushing away nothing can cause us to notice when we twitch, when we squirm, when we feel uneasy. And perhaps by not defining ourselves or others as left or right, Republican, Democrat, good or bad, crazy or sane, we can learn from each other. We can be present to each other. And remember, above all, the words of 1 Corinthians 16:14. Whatever you do, let all you do be done in love. Let's speak that together. Let all you do be done in love.